Today's lecture is underwritten by the Barbara and Herb Kaiser Fund. 3 generations of Kaisers now enjoy Chautauqua, and of course, Herb is known as the king of tarts, as he bakes and delivers lemon tarts for the benefit of Chautauqua's annual fund. Isabel, you'll want to be sure and have one of those. He can be found selling, yes, those of you who have eaten them. He can be found selling his tarts every Monday morning by the amphitheater. So please join me in thanking the Kaisers for their support, as we also thank those of you who make contributions to the Chautauqua Fund. Thank you. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Isabel Wilkerson is the author of The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration, which she spent over 15 years researching and writing, interviewing 1,200 people. This book won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was a 2011 CLSC selection. Ms. Wilkerson previously served as Chicago bureau chief for the New York Times and has taught narrative nonfiction at Princeton, Emory, and Boston universities. She herself is a graduate of Howard University and holds 7 honorary degrees, most recently from Bates College and Southern Methodist University. Her lecture this morning will address the persistent, even returning question of racism, and will give rise in this week to the question, when will racism vanish? So, ladies and gentlemen, concerned citizens north and south, please join me in welcoming Isabel Wilkerson back to Chautauqua.
Thank you so much for inviting me back to this glorious and magical place. I was last here in the summer of 2011, and I had with me this very copy of the book. This is my copy that has gone with me all over the country and outside of the country as I talk about the enduring themes and the shockingly relevant aspects of the book that I wrote that took 15 years to write. I often say that if this book were a human being, it would be in high school and dating. That's how long it took me to write this book. And now, as teenagers and children often do, it has taken over my life, and I literally have been on the road ever since this book first came out. I've been on the road since that wonderful first visit to Chautauqua, and here I am back again. And as I think about all of this, I think, who could possibly have known what would happen in these intervening years in our country? How did we get to where we are right now? What is it that the history and our continuing divisions are trying to teach us? You know, many people view the book that I've written, and I myself viewed it as a work of history. It was a work of history about people persevering under unimaginable odds within essentially living memory of our country. Many people were alive at the time during the Great Migration, ended in 1970, began in World War I and didn't end until the 1970s. And so this was something that was within the lifespan of people, many people alive today, but is far enough back to have felt that we had resolved all of these things, that the legislation of the 1960s addressed and began to deal with the long-standing divisions and inequalities and injustices that had been so much a part of our country's founding and for so much of its history. And so most people would think that I'm writing history, but all we have to do is turn on the news. All we have to do is turn on the news and see the unspooling of the same threads that run through the pages of my book. It gives me no comfort to see the pages of my book resurrected in the evening news, and yet here we are, and this is what we are observing. We now have a metronome of unarmed casualties. We have a catalog of videotaped killings of unarmed American citizens, Black people at the hands of police. We have a metronome of names: Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, John Crawford, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, and continues on and on and on. Women, children, teenagers, all kinds of people. And following these things, we've seen these largely peaceful protests in which people are using signs of surrender, literally falling on their knees, lying in the streets. And then we've seen the warlike response to these protests. Tanks and scopes trained on people as if they were enemy combatants, instead of American citizens exercising their First Amendment rights to protest. And were any of these things happening in another country far away, we would be appalled. We would be quick to condemn, call for sanctions, send in peacekeepers. And yet, overall, the country has shaken its head until the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And then came Charleston. 9 parishioners welcoming a stranger into their sanctuary. The massacre, and then the unbelievable, unimaginable generosity of forgiveness by people who were so grieving the loss of their loved ones. And then, just recently, as a result of all of this, an impassioned plea from the daughter of the Confederacy in the South Carolina legislature, making this heartfelt, tearful plea to pay attention, that she would not be part of this any longer. What courage it took for her to do that. What a lesson in being able to break past the barriers, break past the assumptions, break past the caste system that has controlled and been undergirding our country for so long. And then the flag came down in South Carolina, and then there was the discovery, just days later, that the great hero, the moral guardian in all of American literature, Atticus Finch, even he was not what we had been led to believe. And so we are in a karmic moment in our country. We're at a precipice of deciding, who will we be? What do we stand for? What are we going to do about the history that we have inherited, a history that is sometimes so ugly and so frightening that we don't want to look at it? And I'm reminded that our country is like a house that needs tending, like any other edifice. The house is hundreds of years old. It takes work to maintain a house, as any of us who own an older house know so well. It takes work and a lot of effort to restore and to renovate as problems occur. The work never ends. It never ends. It never ends. And so these crises over the last few months and years have revived these ancient, unresolved wounds that we have not wanted to look at for so long, that we thought had vanished, that we thought we had solved, and clearly we have not. We keep reliving the past, and we will continue to relive the past until we address those fundamental challenges, the fundamental issues, the fundamental infrastructure upon which our country's society was actually based. You know, when you have a storm, a big storm that begins to pound down upon your house, and you may not want to go into the basement. You may not want to go into the basement after a storm. Maybe you have a sump pump that's helping, maybe you do not. But you don't want to go into it because you don't know what you might find. But if you ignore it at your own peril. Whenever water rises up, whatever you have ignored will come back to haunt you, as we have been haunted in recent years. Whatever you have ignored will only fester and grow worse. Whatever we have ignored will not go away until we face up to it, until we inspect it, until we examine it, until we address it and resolve it. And so we are in a karmic moment of reckoning. And as I think about all of this, I'm often asked, what are the ways to push through this? What is it that we're actually dealing with? So there's the history of what actually happened. And so few of us actually even know what the true history is, because it's not really being taught in schools. You know, since this book has been out, I've been to almost every state in the Union. This book is very well traveled. I've been outside of the country. I've been from Singapore to, believe it or not, Parliament in the UK with this book, talking about this. And wherever I go, I find that when I'm telling them about the story of this great migration, people are always stunned because they say they had no idea. I hear from people all the time of all walks of life, all backgrounds, ethnicities. When they have read the book, they said, I had no idea. Many of the people are people who were living in the South or living in the Midwest, people who were of the age to have lived through some of the things that I've described. And even they say, I had no idea. So that means that there's a lot that we don't know about our own country. So much that we do not know, that once we know, we begin to be able to connect the dots and see what it is truly that we are dealing with. You know, a lot of people end up being, before reading the book or before taking it on, they begin to fear that maybe this is going to make them feel bad. Maybe this is going to make them feel guilty. Maybe this is going to make them feel angry, ashamed, or defensive. But what this book seeks to do is it seeks to cross the false boundaries that have been constructed long before our great-great-grandparents were even thought of. It seeks to have us all imagine, to feel and to experience what would it have been like to be someone in a totally different era in our country, the very beginnings, you might say, of the world that we live in now. We're living with the after effects of what they were living. And what would it be like to be this person? In other words, this book is really not just a narrative of the Great Migration. It is, in fact, that's actually the least of what it is. I've discovered that also in the course of all of this. This book is actually a historical X-ray of the psychological and social infrastructure upon which our current divided society was built. It reveals the DNA of our recurring divisions. And it shows how each and every one of us, no matter our background, no matter our race, no matter where we came from, whether we just arrived or have been here for generations, how each and every one of us is imprisoned in a caste system built long, long ago, which we have inherited, which we did not want, and whose invisible arms reach out to the current day and separate us, lead us to dismiss others as other, those who do not look like us, to not see the humanity, the true abiding humanity that binds us all together.